Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome back to another great episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, it is more in our A+ series, continuing that for you good folks out there so that you can get studied up and pass that exam. Joining us back in the studio to lend his expertise on that topic, our good friend, Mr. Wes Bryan. Wes, welcome back, man. How's it going today?
Man, it's going great. Great to be here. And that's right, we are continuing along in that 902 series. And we've been talking about security in the last couple of episodes. Well, we're going to continue on in security. And one of the things that we're talking about, you probably noticed by the title of the show, is data destruction and disposal. Now, when it comes to data destruction, keep in mind we're not talking a Watergate scandal, right? Or who knows, maybe we are talking about the Watergate scandal, right? But in all seriousness, we're talking about making sure that company information doesn't end up in the wrong hands. Now, company information doesn't necessarily just mean that it's going to be company employees. That's part of it for sure, but it's also things like customer data. And we've got a couple of techniques, right? We've got a few things that we can do to ensure that the data that's within our information systems doesn't end up in the wrong hands. Because really, I mean, we're talking about computing. Right here in the A+, we talk about, the computing industry for, for a generalization. Information systems hold information, and we don't want just anybody having access to that information. And more so when we talk about it, think about the fact that the systems that you have that store information, they have a lifespan, right? And it's not a matter of if these devices are going to be replaced, it's just a matter of when, right? And we're not even just generally or even talking about things like failure, but failure could be a problem as well, right? If a hard drive fails, just because we can't access the data through our electronic means, right, doesn't mean that somebody couldn't take that hard drive and find a way into it to access the information. So we do have to have some steps that we take to make sure that we do things like data sanitization, right? That's one of the main things that they call it, right? And there are a few techniques that we're going to talk about inside of this episode.
Well, Wes, I've been in this field quite a bit of years now. As I'm looking at it, oh my goodness, I got a little gray in my beard from when I first started. But one of the ways that we always did, I actually started the first time I destroyed a hard drive, we took a 2-pound hammer, walked it out to a concrete wall, and just beat the mess out of it like it owed us money.
That's
right. Awesome.
Yeah, and I have to say, physical destruction, it's one of the best means when it comes to doing data eradication. In fact, I've had to do it. I've done it from one of our other hosts here. One of our other hosts, Don Pizzette, you've probably seen him. If not, go check out some of his episodes. The man's absolutely brilliant. Well, one of the things he does every time he gets a laptop, a new one every 6 months, is that he buys a new hard drive, right? The hard drives don't have enough speed for him, and they don't have enough capacity, right? So first thing he does is he replaces the hard drives. Well, every time he goes into a new laptop, he's got an old drive, right? Well, he actually came to me a few months ago, and I just happened to be wanting to show you guys in the 901 series a little bit about the drives, and he says, well, I've got all these drives, but once you're done with that drive, can you do me a favor? If you're going to make sure that the data is destroyed off of that drive, here's a handful of these drives that I've had and I've kind of gained over the years. Can you make sure that you take care of them? So what did I do? That's what Dan said. Hammer, right? Now, I said this off camera, but I'm going to have to say it now. Hammer time, right?
Hammer time.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to go back and go back to the 80s.
Hammer time while you were hammering?
Oh man, I even had the parachute pants as well too. It's the only way that you can do it.
Man.
But I want you to understand that the physical destruction with a hammer is something that that works really well, and even in laptop drives. And one of the reasons you got to be careful with this one though, because in the laptop drives, believe it or not, the platters aren't metal. They have a metal coating. They're actually glass, and that's what some people don't realize. In fact, Don didn't even realize that. I said, watch this, Don, and I took all the platters out, and I literally took each one of the laptop drives completely apart. It's a little SATA drive. Actually, he had a couple that were still parallel ATA, believe it or not, too. And I took them apart, and I took the platters out. Now, you got to be careful with this. I've done it before. I know how to do it, right? I've had to do it for another company. And I wrapped it in tape, right? And I hit it one time with a hammer, just once. And it shattered, right? I mean, just millions of pieces just went everywhere. And I come back and I said, in a box, I'm like, here's your laptop platters, right? So physical destruction works great. Now, I could do something that's maybe not so extreme. I could just take a drill, right? You can kind of drill through them. That's another one that they call
Jim
out
in the
too.
chat room says thermite will do the job.
Oh, thermite. Thermite's great. In fact, thermite incinerates everything. In fact, it'll go through the box, it'll go through the floor.
Yeah.
You keep on going,
It's
right?
going to burn until it's done.
And you know, and interestingly enough, that is a valid destruction technique,
yeah.
right? In fact, we're going to look at some companies here because we're going to talk about some of the things that they mention is incineration. Well, guess what? Thermite will incinerate a drive, right? It burns right through the drive. Very, very hot. I've also seen videos of people that said, hey, you know, I needed to get rid of a drive, so what do? Acetylene torch. Melt it, right? So incineration is also something that you can do as well. Now, keep in mind that there are times when maybe you have so many of these drives that maybe you don't want to have to take care of them, right? Now, somebody like Don, you know, handed me 4 or 5 drives that he handed me. That's not that big of a deal, right? But Dan, I know you've worked in enterprise environments, and we've talked about this in other episodes where you're dealing with hundreds, thousands of computers, right? And when you get a new deployment of computers, when a certain batch of computers comes to the end of its life cycle, you're going to have potentially thousands of drives, right? That's where it starts to get a little tricky, right? That's where, are you sure that you've completely taken care of that drive? Or does your company have enough valuable information potentially on that drive that it benefits them to pay another company that can ensure that data, right? They can ensure that data, and I mean literally not insure and insure with licensed, bonded, insured, that the data itself isn't going to be obtainable, all right? Now, again, when we talk about physical destruction of the drives too, let's be honest here. When you remove the platters out of a drive, a lot of times that's enough. And let me tell you why. The moment you open a drive, it can start to corrode, right? It's one of the reasons they put drives together, right? And they're usually in clean rooms. The other thing, too, is that every single drive is balanced, right? And you'll see that the drives have spacers in between them, and when you remove the platters, it's almost next to impossible. Now, I don't want to say impossible. Never say never, right? That's too absolute. To realign them and get access to the information. But let's go back to the concept of maybe I don't want to be responsible for 1,000 drives. So what can I do? Well, here, I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead and let's do a Google search here. And there's a couple of things out there. In fact, thermite was on my list there. So thermite data destruction, right? So thanks out there to Jim, as always. And let's see if there's companies here. Data loss made. You know what? In fact, I'm going to go to another one that I know that's out there is Data Killers. Data Killers, I believe this is a software. There we go. Offers certified destruction nationwide. Okay, so this is a type of company, right, that you can go to, and you can essentially pay them. You can say, okay, I need complete incineration of the drives, and they will sometimes come on site. All right, and they also have different certifications, because one of the things that you might be required to have is a certification of destruction, right? Again, not that you're certified to destroy things, but that you, when they take or they acquiesce, if they grab your hard drives and they say, okay, we're going to destroy them, sometimes they even do things like documenting and showing you a video of them destroying the devices, and then they give you this certificate that says, hey, yes, here's your certificate of destruction, and we ensure that if this information isn't totally gone, guess what? You're not liable for it anymore. We're liable for it. And that's one of the great things, especially when you're talking about, again, hundreds of drives, thousands of drives.
That's a big claim for them to be able to take on that responsibility and say, you go ahead and pass that buck over here. We will guarantee that this data will never see the light of day ever again. That's a big thing, because if it does, man, they're going to be held to the fire. Hopefully not their own fire if they're incinerating.
And I can only imagine a place that, like you worked, where it's an insurance company.
Yeah.
That the amount of liability.
We had this big, it was basically a hydraulic jack with a wedge in it. And we stick drives in there and pull it down. It would just crush it. You know, that would work. That's great for like laptop data or whatever. But for something that came off of that server, that's going to a company like that.
Definitely, and these companies that you're talking about also have those big conveyor belts where they do exactly that. If you ever get a chance, go out to YouTube and look at data destruction, hard drive destruction, computer recycling, right? Well, quite literally, they go up a big conveyor belt and they fall down into this, it looks like a chipper.
Yeah.
But it's not a wood chipper. It's literally...
I've seen it eat up a car.
Yes,
they
exactly.
drop a car, a refrigerator, and just it's
yeah.
gone.
And before you know it, you got postage stamp sized pieces of whatever went down into it. And again, it's a valid form of data destruction. Let me show you, so we're not just using any one person. I've got another one out there that that I've also seen before, and that's Shred Zero is another one out there. Let's see, Shred Zero. Yeah, there we go. Data destruction made easy. All right, hopefully their website comes up. But again, just to kind of give you, you know, that you do have options, right? We could go to a place like this that does secure data destruction, right? They do things like paper shredding, right? Paper shredding is important because, notice, cross-cut papers, right? Now, in honesty, I could do a paper shredder, right? And I could buy a cheap one, right? So I'll tell you what, let's go, we'll take Staples here, right? I can go to Staples and I can do paper shredding, right? Notice that this paper shredder here, it's got a cross-cut, right? And it tells you how many cross cuts it is, so people can't use tape and tape it back together, right? Or set them side by side and then take a picture and basically retrieve the information. But I want you to notice something. Here's the drawback. In a Soho environment, these are perfect. 24 sheets. All right, look at this Shred Zero. 8,000 pounds per hour.
How many sheets are in a pound?
My goodness, I couldn't even tell you, right? But again, if you're talking about an enterprise level company, if you're talking about companies on the size and the magnitude that Dan's worked for in the past, chances are they've got an entire warehouse full of boxes, right, that it needs to be shred.
It's funny. They'll pull up with this massive truck, and it's got a shredding system in the box of the box truck. And they just start throwing stuff in there, and it becomes confetti. Yeah,
definitely. In fact, we've got one here. One of the there multiple companies are within the building here that IT Pro TV has its location, and one of the companies is a financial company, and they have a place that comes every so often, and they literally do exactly what Dan does or said. They have a trash can that's got a locking system that only their people have access. We don't have access to it. So once something goes in there, it's not coming out until the people come on site and they take the trash can out, and then they shred, and then they give a certificate, again, certificate of destruction, if it is what they call it. Sometimes it's just a simple receipt, but they give it back to the financial institute that says, or institution that says, okay, your data has been completely shredded. So keep in mind that physical destruction is great, right? You can do things like the paper shredders, right? And you can do it on a pretty big volume here. You can do things like, again, incineration, right? Oops, excuse me there. Let me bring that back up, right? You can also do things like, they talk about electronic media as well. You can do things like electromagnetic degaussing. Now, why might I want to pay somebody to do this? To do things like electromagnetic degaussing. Let me show you why, all right? Now, if I've got Dan's credit card, I'm going to buy one of these, right? Maybe.
Yeah, you're going to get declined.
You're going to get declined. It's going to come back. It's going to say, yeah, right. Yeah. All right, so let's go shopping for one of these devices. All right, so right there at the top of the list, we have one 105 hard drive degausser.
Two at that price.
That's right. That's
Giving
right.
them away.
And these are obviously very, very good devices, very positive reviews. And again, guys, yeah, I tell you what, we'll give the person credit here that this is their product, right? So, here you're talking about something that even $15,000, right? But it uses electromagnetic waves, if you will, to magnetically erase. And again, this is more of a physical destruction.
I had a little one that was like basically was a square-shaped donut that you passed the drive-through a few times, and then that was basically it. This is probably a little more powerful than that.
Yeah, probably. They're probably telling you that if you have some kind of like metal fillings in your mouth, don't go near this one. Yeah, right. But yeah, so you can see that, yeah, you can buy these again, but it might be beneficial to your company maybe to just go ahead and pay somebody else to do this, right? And again, because if it's only going to happen once every 5 years, usually 3 to 5 years, 3 usually at the minimum, 5 years I think is what people like to get on your return on investment, right, for any kind of piece of hardware there. Drives fail, so that might be even shorter than that, just as the way storage medium is, right? So those are things that you can do. Again, keep in mind one of the best ways to sanitize the data is to completely destroy the data so that it cannot be removed. Now, what if you are going to recycle the devices? Going into something completely different that has nothing to do with physical destruction, what if you're going to actually keep the device? Well, there's other techniques that you have to use, right? And it doesn't really have to do with this type of destruction here because we're not really destroying the device itself. All right, because at this point, when we talk about physical destruction, what we're talking about is whatever the storage medium is, whatever the information system is that you're using, you no longer can use that after the fact, right? Obviously, with paper media, printed media, optical drive or optical discs, a lot of times we're not really worried about those too much. Once they're destroyed, we never had any option to ever use them again, right? With maybe the exception of being rewritable discs, but again, those, whether you use those or not, are up to your own company. All right, we might reuse things like tapes. All right, tape drives in order for, to do backups, right? Well, when you're doing backups, a lot of times what you're doing is an overwriting process anyways, which just means you're taking a backup over a backup, right? And the new data basically overwrites the old data, right? So that can happen, but we're doing that for the purposes like removable media to reuse it. Now, what if you have hard drives that haven't, gone past their life cycle? Or maybe you're going to donate them to a school. I worked with a company before that I was teaching with, and when the computers got not so powerful enough to do some of the things that we needed to do, that we needed to teach them, virtualization, maybe something a little bit more powerful like CPU intensive, like the Adobe suite. Well, the computers were just fine for sending things like email, doing just basic research. So what the owner would do was he'd take them and donate them to a school, right? Why not, right? Donate them to a school, and then now you've saved that school a lot of money, and they get to reuse them. Problem is, there's still data on those drives. So that's where recycling techniques come in versus a physical destruction, because you get the advantage of reusing the device. Physical destruction, you're not going to reuse the device. Recycling techniques, on the other hand, allows you the ability to reuse the device, right? It might be in a situation where maybe you're reusing hard drives, but you've got new motherboards, maybe new, stronger processors for whatever reason, but you got a terabyte drive and the drive's just fine. Well, now we got to talk about things like formatting. All right, and there's a few different types of formats that you have to keep in mind, all right? And what they call out on the exam, they talk about recycling or repurposing best practices. Again, keep in mind that the goal here is to reuse the device, right? So whether you call it recycling or repurposing, the device is still going to be operational after you get rid of it or it moves to whatever its next purpose is. So there's two types of formats. There's what's known as a low-level format and a high-level format. Now, on your objectives, they call it a low-level format and a standard format, all right? Low-level formatting, what is that? Not something you're going to do, all right? Low-level formatting is something that's done by the manufacturer themselves prior to releasing the drives into the public, right? So what they do is they take the drives and they run it through a mechanical test, all right? And they basically check every single sector on the hard drive, or if it happens to be a solid state, it's going to be a cell, right? Making sure that the drive is functional. But that happens at the manufacturer. That's not something that we do. Then there's standard level formatting. They also call it high level formatting. And that's what somebody like myself and somebody like Dan can do, what something like you can do at your house, all right? So we've talked a lot about things like, for instance, the Windows operating systems. We have the NTFS, FAT32 is used in all operating systems, EXT for your Linux-based operating systems. What do we have? In Mac, we've got the hierarchical file systems, right? So these file systems apply a logical structure to the hard drive, right? And then we can store our data. Well, the thing is, we can kind of scramble that logical structure with software. That's the high-level format. So I can do something like a defrag.exe, and I run the disk defragmenter. What is it doing? Well, it's logically arranging your data in contiguous blocks, right? But the same thing can go is I can format the drive, and I can apply a file system to it, preparing it so that the operating system can use it. That's a high-level format. Don't let those terms, again, confuse you. When I take a hard drive and I want to make it operational here in Windows, I'm going to apply NTFS to it. I'm essentially formatting the drive. I'm doing, whether I do a quick format or a full format, not so quick format. Yeah. So let's talk about those two differences, right? What's the difference between a quick format and a full format? If you've ever had to prepare a drive with NTFS, well, if you do a quick format, it just says apply the file system to it and let's start storing files. If you do the full format, it actually does something kind of interesting. It does a check disk, right, in the background that we can do standard to our. We can run that that utility inside of the operating system, and it literally checks every single sector along the drive. Takes a little bit longer, all right, but it could ensure that the data that the data is stored in sectors of the drive that aren't bad. Now you might say, well, wait a second, Wes, drives that are bad, or sectors that are bad? What do you mean by that? Well, drives are always failing. All right, the sectors are always failing. Operating systems are just smart enough to it, and the file systems that they have, being journaled the way they are, they know how to move files around bad sectors, right? So it's kind of interesting that that happens, all right? That's all high-level formatting, right? If I run a format on a Windows, in the Windows operating system, and I apply NTFS or FAT32, guess what I'm doing? A high-level format. If I'm in Linux and I apply something like ext3 or 4 to a hard drive, and then we install the Linux operating system on it, well, that formatting, if you will, that we've done is the high-level formatting. Now, I mentioned briefly something known as an overwriting, right? What is overwriting? Well, I want you to think about this. Let's say that I've just prepared a drive, all right? I've got, well, maybe I've had a drive that is prepared, and I've been using it for a while. It's had NTFS on it, right? It's inside of the Windows operating system, and I've been storing information on it, all right? I decide that I want to format the drive. I want to do the high-level formatting. Well, what have I done? Well, I basically rebuilt the master file table. I did nothing to the electromagnetic level of the drive, right? Well, I haven't done anything. That data is still there. So, how do we try to sanitize the drives? If we are still going to reuse them, they have data on them, and we format them, but you know that the information's still there. Well, what you can do, I want you to think about it, is go over to a dry erase board and write a word, all right? And then what I want you to do is write zeros across the top of that word in another color. And then take another color and I want you to write ones. And then I want you to write zeros. And then I want you to write ones. And I want you to write zeros, right? So you do a combination of erasing and writing, and essentially what happens is all you're doing is masking the data, right? That's your overwriters. In fact, we got techniques out there that do file overwriting. In fact, I've actually booted into something known as DBAN. This is actually a kind of like a Linux Live CD or DVD, if you will, that, depending on what you put it on. It doesn't really need a DVD, but this is a little almost like a Linux Live operating system. And what this allows me to do is this is what's known as a disk wipe. Keep in mind that sometimes those terms are used the same. Sometimes you might hear it scrubbing the drive. Sometimes you might hear it overwriting. Sometimes you might hear disk wipe. There are standards out there, and you don't have to know these standards for the A+ exam. I just mentioned them here, so if you guys are out there, guys and gals are out there studying, you want to find out, hey, what the heck is it if I want to overwrite data? Well, believe it or not, the Department of Defense, just like many other standards organizations out there, lay out standards on what they consider a completely overwritten or sanitized drive, right? And their standard just happens to be what's known as the DoD 5220.22-M. Please do not worry about that for the exam. Some of the acronyms we talk about, absolutely worry about it. Don't worry about this. This is just for your own benefit if you want to read it. All right, and you can do a series of overwrites, right? And one of the things that it does is it writes zeros, right? Makes one pass, writes zeros to every location on the drive, and then it reads it back. Make sure that those zeros have been written. And then what it does is it writes ones to every location of the drive, right? That's the second pass, and it reads that information to make sure that the ones are there. And I believe the last part, I think it's three writes overall in the standard, is it writes random characters, well, pseudo-random in computing, to every location of the drive and verifies that it can read those back. So it's just masking the information so that if you do have a computer laboratory, essentially what they're saying is with this standard, it should be unfeasible, not impossible, but unfeasible to recover the information after it's gone through these type of passes, right? So again, remember those when you're repurposing your drives, right? The best practice says do the high-level format. You could start there, right? But have an overwriter like this. This is a free piece of software. I absolutely love it. I mean, it's open source. You don't have to pay for it. And it will go through and it will scrub or do a drive wipe. Now, they don't call out this on the exam, but I do want to mention your mobile devices also come into play here too. This is more for, like Dan and I have done, it's not always about what's on the exam, but what can benefit you, right? We have plenty of these devices out here today, right? Your mobile devices and your tablets. I want you to understand that when you enroll devices into what's known as a mobile device management system, an MDM-based system, you also have enterprise-level technologies that can do what's known as remote wipes, all right? It isn't in the exam objectives, but if we're talking about data destruction and disposal, I don't feel like I'd be doing you any benefit if I didn't just briefly mention that too. All right? So Dan's the administrator. This is a business company phone. Wes has just been fired, right? For whatever reason, right? Maybe I was trying to sing on the job and people realized how bad of a singer I was, right? And they fired me. But I've got company information on this, right? But I haven't made it back to the office, and Dan thinks that maybe I'm going to do something, you know, I'll be one of the bad actors, right? Malicious insider. So what he does, or maybe not even that,
It's
right?
just a precautionary
Right, absolutely.
It
Maybe
has nothing to do with whether or not I think Wes is a bad guy.
Right. Maybe I lost the device.
Right. Could have
right?
happened.
Right.
Got stolen.
I took the company phone out to the amusement park, and it fell out of my pocket on the roller coaster. Right. I call up Dan and say, Dan, I need you to erase that drive. Right. Well, Dan can log into the management system, and he can actually send a command over the internet and wipe the drive completely. So that is another technology that I also wanted to mention, the remote wipe capabilities, because it also comes into play with data destruction and disposal.
All right, Wes, plenty of ways in which we can wipe our devices, especially hard drives specifically for the exam. So know them, be familiar with them. Heck, even try some. Go grab a hammer. You haven't lived until you've beaten the snot out of an old hard drive. Just go do it. It's a great stress relief as well as a fantastic way to ensure your data is protected. That being said, Wes, it looks like we're out of time for this episode. Thanks for joining us again today. Thank you guys out there for watching. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.